They humiliated my mother in public, and I broke off the engagement in front of everyone without a second thought. I never imagined my life would be turned upside down on a day that was supposed to be one of the happiest. I lost my mother 7 months ago. It was still fresh, it still hurt to breathe sometimes, you know. And even with that hole in my chest, I carried on, because I believed life had to go on, that I had found someone who would walk with me from now on. The engagement was arranged quickly, because her family said it was best not to delay too long after the morning. In my innocence, I accepted everything, because I trusted her. I trusted that they were respecting my grief. I trusted that my mother would be happy to see me moving on. But I was blind. I didn't see the signs. And that night I saw everything with such brutal clarity that it felt like a beating in the chest. The party started out normal, with that forced joy you always see at family events. I tried to smile, tried to distract myself, tried not to think about how much I wished my mom was there. I remembered the times she'd tell me to choose someone who would add value, someone who respected my values. And there I tried to convince myself I'd chosen right. But things went downhill when the toast started. Her uncle, already half drunk, started making stupid jokes, calling my mom a fake saint, saying she helped others just to show off. I froze. I looked at her, waiting for her to interrupt, to say something. Nothing. People laughed, more jokes. Each sentence was like a knife spinning inside me. I knew right then and there that my life was going down the drain, and that I needed to do something. I wanted to be polite, to keep my cool, you know, but my head started to spin, because I knew everything my mother had done for that family. When her father had trouble at work, it was my mother who gave up our belongings to help. When her mother needed expensive surgery, it was my mother who ran after doctors, who lent money without ever charging back. And now, they were mocking her memory. I got up from the table without even realizing it. My heart pounding so hard, I could only hear the noise inside my head. I was shaking with anger, with disappointment. It wasn't just the jokes, it was her silence, the way she lowered her head, as if it were normal. I knew at that moment that I wasn't going to stay there, but I needed to speak. I needed them to hear. I walked to the front of the crowd and grabbed the microphone, my hand sweating so much I could barely hold it. I hadn't prepared a speech, I just spoke. I said my mother wasn't there to defend herself, but I was, and that I wouldn't stand for anyone spitting on her story, much less people she'd helped. I said marriage wasn't just about getting beautiful people together for a photo. It was about respect. It was about character. I don't even remember what I'd said. All I know is that when I finished, the room was silent. You could even hear the air conditioning. I looked at my fiancée or ex-fiancée and told her that was the end of it. I saw the shock on her face, heard people whispering, but I only felt a strange relief, as if for the first time in months I was truly breathing. After I dropped the microphone, I didn't wait for anyone to convince me otherwise. I didn't want to hear excuses or whining, much less promises of change. I knew that if I stayed there, they'd try to break me. So I left. I left alone, leaving everything behind: the party, the guests, the decorations I'd helped pay for, the expensive rings. None of it meant anything to me anymore. All I could think about was my mother, her face, how proud she must have been of me in that moment. And at the same time, it was like a truck had run over me. I felt strong and broken at the same time. I don't think I've ever cried as much as I did on that drive home. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, staring at photos of my mother, remembering every piece of advice she'd given me that I'd ignored while trying to maintain a relationship that had long since shown signs of decay. I remembered the times she'd say, "Pay attention to how people treat those who can't reciprocate," and I'd pretend not to notice her family's comments, the jokes, the disguised contempt. I always brushed it off, thinking everything would change after marriage. But then I understood that respect isn't negotiable. You either have it or you don't, and I almost sold my mother's memory for a life of pretense. The next day was a flood of messages. People trying to understand, people pretending they didn't know anything, and she sent me crying messages, saying I'd overreacted, that it was just a bad joke, that everyone had had too much to drink. But I didn't want to hear any more lame excuses. I'd spent years watching my mother being humiliated behind her back without her knowing, enduring jokes about being a single mother, about having to work hard to raise me without anyone's help. And I let it all go because I thought it was a family thing, that the important thing was the love between us. But that engagement was like life's final warning, showing me I was wrong, and I chose to listen. The following days were hard, I'll be honest. I didn't feel strong, I didn't feel victorious. I felt broken. I wondered if I'd done the right thing, if I'd been impulsive. But then I remembered their laughing expressions as they mocked my mother, her indifference at the time, and it was as if everything came flooding back. The wound stung, but my conscience was clear. I had to cancel everything, deal with catering bills, return gifts, explain things to acquaintances. It was one of the most humiliating weeks of my life. But each day I woke up alone. Without that burden, I felt myself slowly rebuilding my own peace. There was a day, I think a week later, when I sat in my mother's room and looked at her things. Those little things no one values, her favorite mug, the perfume she wore, the notebook where she wrote everything down. And I cried like a child. But for the first time, it wasn't just sadness. It was also relief. I knew I hadn't let anyone step on her, that I had done what she taught me my whole life, not to bow down to people without character. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't lost anymore. I knew exactly what kind of person I wanted by my side from now on. I knew I would no longer compromise my values to fit into rotten environments. After the dust settled, the judgments came, of course. People said I should have been more patient, that marriage was about compromise, about forgiveness. But I don't regret it one bit, because I learned the hard way that there are things we shouldn't forgive. And disrespect for the one who raised me alone, gave me everything they could, is one of them. I saw people disappear, friendships end, people turn their backs. And you know what? Better this way. Better alone than surrounded by people who think it's okay to step on those who are no longer there to defend themselves. Over time, I began to see that I lost nothing that night. I freed myself. I freed myself from living a lie. I also had to face my own mistakes, realizing that I was the first to ignore signs, that I often kept quiet to avoid creating conflict. And it was hard to admit that to myself. I thought I was being mature, that I was avoiding fights, when in reality I was just being a coward. My mother taught me to be firm, but I was being weak out of fear of being alone. The penny dropped when I realized that being with someone who belittles you or allows you to be belittled is the worst loneliness there is. It was painful to accept, but it was also liberating, because from that moment on, I decided I would never again pretend everything was fine just to keep up appearances. The best part is that after I cut everything off, for good, my life began to brighten. I reconnected with old friends, people I distanced myself from because she didn't like them. I went back to doing the things I enjoyed, taking care of my health and pursuing my hobbies. It took time, of course. There were still days when the void hit, especially on Sundays, which were days I spent with my mother. But every small victory, everything I did for myself, was a brick in the way of rebuilding my self-esteem. And I finally understood that honoring my mother wasn't just about defending her name, it was also about being the man she always wanted me to be. Someone with the courage to choose the right thing, even if it cost a lot. Many people later said I'd been radical, that I could have resolved things with conversation, that family is complicated, but anyone who's been through it knows. It wasn't just a joke, it wasn't a slip-up. It was years of disrespect, years of comments I pretended not to hear, years of adapting so as not to displease anyone. That night was the final straw, and no amount of talking can fix a lack of character. I remember every situation my mother went through in silence, trying to be well-liked by people who deep down despised her. I wasn't going to make the same mistake. And knowing that I'd managed to break that cycle, that I hadn't sold myself for any marriage, gave me a sense of dignity I'd never felt before. The crazy thing is that when we step away from a toxic environment, our heads clear. I started remembering moments I'd previously erased from my memory. Small situations that I now see revealed everything. The way she got angry when I talked about my mother, how she dismissed me when I said I wanted to visit my family, how there was always some veiled comparison. I accepted so much thinking it was nonsense. And in the end, it was just the beginning of what would be a lifetime of disrespect. When I realized this, it was like taking a blindfold off my eyes. I didn't lose a fiancé. I escaped a miserable fate, and that made me feel stronger than I ever imagined I could. I won't lie, I had a tough night after that. I wanted to text, to explain better, to go back just to end that empty feeling. But every time I thought about it, I remembered my mother's face, the nights she spent crying alone, hidden from me so I wouldn't worry. I remembered the times she told me to never settle for less than I deserved. And it was as if every memory of her pulled me back on the right path. I learned that not all longing is healthy, that sometimes we miss the routine, the customs, but that doesn't mean it was good. And I held on tight because I knew it was the right thing to do. As time went on, I also started attracting other people, people with similar values, friends who truly rooted for me, co-workers who admired my attitude, and this gradually healed my heart. I began to see that respect attracts respect, that when you don't accept being mistreated, you automatically filter out who deserves to be by your side. This changed everything in my life, even the way I approached work and old friendships. I stopped accepting crumbs in any area of my life, and that was the greatest gift that night gave me, the chance to start over cleanly without carrying around dead weight. I also needed to learn to forgive myself. For a long time, I blamed myself, thinking that if I had spoken up sooner, set boundaries sooner, maybe none of this would have happened. But then I understood that everyone has their own time to wake up, and mine was right there, in front of everyone, in the most embarrassing situation possible. But it was. And that was already a lot. I stopped torturing myself with what-ifs, and started focusing on what I could do from that moment on. And look, it wasn't easy. There were days when it felt like I was going backwards, days when I wanted to erase everything from my mind. But deep down, I knew I had made the right choice. And that kept me going. Time passed, and I realized how much I'd lost myself trying to please others. Even the way I dressed had changed to fit into their world, the places I went, the things I did. It was bizarre to look back and see how much I'd lost myself. And when I started reconnecting with myself, it was like rediscovering who I was. I went back to frequenting simple places I enjoyed, talking to people who truly made me feel good, without worrying about status or approval. And each little choice was a personal victory. Because I was no longer living to please anyone, I was living to honor who I am. And most importantly, to honor everything my mother did for me. After a while, I summoned the courage to do something I'd been putting off. I went to visit my mother's grave and told her everything. I sat there on the ground alone and recounted every detail of that night, everything I'd been holding back for years. I cried, laughed, remembering her, and promised that from then on, would never again allow anyone to make me forget my origins, my worth. I can't explain it, but it was as if a ton of weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I left that cemetery feeling lighter, with a peace I hadn't felt since the day she died. It was as if I had finally honored her memory in the truest way possible. Today I look back and feel no regret. Was it painful? Yes. Did it knock me off my feet? Definitely. But it also rebuilt me, strengthened me in a way I never imagined possible. I See people living in fake relationships, stifling who they are just to maintain appearances. And I thank God every day for having the courage to leave them. I know my mother would be proud of me. And more than that, I'm finally proud of myself. Because I understood that respect is non-negotiable, that love without respect is worthless, and that dignity is priceless. This was, without a doubt, the biggest turning point in my life. I know many people think getting over something means forgetting, but I've learned that's not the case. There are days when I still remember that night and feel anger, sadness, and wish I had reacted sooner. But the difference is that today, that memory no longer paralyzes me. It drives me. Whenever I find myself accepting less than I deserve, whether at work, with friends, or in any situation, I remember that party. That microphone in my hand, the choice I made not to keep quiet. And that gives me strength, because I know that if I could get up after that, I can face anything. I'm no longer the guy who bows his head to please others. And perhaps the greatest lesson I learned from all this is that we need to listen to ourselves. I spent years ignoring my own discomfort, trying to cover the situation with a sieve. And it was only when everything exploded that I understood how much I betrayed myself. Today, any sign of disrespect, any bad feeling in my chest, I take seriously. I learned to listen to myself, to prioritize myself, and that changed everything. Because when we respect ourselves, the world notices. The right people stay, the wrong ones disappear, and life goes on much more smoothly. I'm not ashamed of my story, quite the opposite. I tell it with pride because it reminded me of the man I want to be. And who knows, by sharing it here, I might also help someone open their eyes before it's too late. Today, I understand that that day was a turning point in my life. It wasn't just the end of an engagement. It was the end of a phase where I lived to please, to be accepted, to fit into places that weren't meant for me. It was there that I decided I would never again accept being in environments where I had to diminish my story to fit into someone else's life. My mother raised me to be a respectable man, and I almost threw it all away trying to belong to a family that spit on what she represented. But I managed to see myself in time. I managed to remember who I was. And that saved me from an unhappy life. And I won't. Even today, there are moments when loneliness hits. There are days when I miss my mother so much that it feels like I won't be able to breathe. But when that happens, I remember the strength I discovered within myself that night. I remember that I was able to stand up for myself, to face the odds, to face everyone and do what was right. And that gives me strength. It reminds me that no matter how difficult it is, I can stand tall, true to who I am and to those who raised me. My mother taught me to walk with my head held high, and that's how I continue. One step at a time, respecting my story, without letting anyone tarnish the memory of those who truly loved me. Today, I can say with certainty that it was the hardest, yet also the most liberating decision of my life. Many people are afraid to cut ties, especially when it involves marriage, when everyone expects you to hold the fort. But I've learned that there are some things we don't have to hold. That if being with someone requires you to endure humiliation, then they're not the right person for you. Life is too short to spend it trying to fix what was born wrong. And I no longer have patience for people who pretend they're joking when they hurt you, for those who disrespect the ones you love and then try to cover up. And I'm leaving this story here because I wish I'd read something like this sooner. Maybe I would have woken up earlier. Maybe I would have avoided some pain. But if my story can open someone's eyes, it was worth it. There is no true love without respect. There is no future without admiration. And no one has the right to belittle those who raised you, those who loved you unconditionally. I almost lost myself trying to make it work with the wrong people. But today I know who I am, I know my worth, and I know the kind of person I want by my side. And above all, I know my mother would be proud of who I've become. And that's worth more than any wedding ring.